Hi everyone, welcome to Climb Your Everest Leadership Skills series. This is session, I think, 28. Welcome. So today I invited my amazing friend Marilyn Carter, and she's gonna talk about women in leadership and how important it is as women to participate, be active wherever you are, wherever we work, and how we can do that and what are some of the best ways. So thank you, Marilyn, for being here. With no further ado, let's start the session.
Wonderful. Well, thank you first, Dr. Sarah, for inviting me to meet this amazing group of leaders and learners and ladies and gentlemen. I'm really pleased and honored to be with you and to meet each of you. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about politics, leadership, women in leadership, how society benefits from all of our participation as leaders. And Sarah's going to be sharing the slides, and we have some time at the end for questions. But if at any point along the way you would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom meeting, either screen or with the participants' reactions, and Dr. Safari will catch me hopefully, and I'll be able to take those questions in the moment. So first off, my name's Marilyn Carter. I live in a place called Orange County in the state of North Carolina, and you see the outline of my home state in this background in the United States. And I've been involved in many community service initiatives. I am a political organizer. I'm an engineer. I am a former corporate leader with 30 years of experience in some very big companies as an engineer in operations management in IT. I took an early retirement a few years ago because I was able to, and I felt it was important for me to start to give back to my community. And thank you, Sarah, for transitioning. So what you'll see here in these pictures are some things that I have done in my different roles, but I have to not talk about those pictures until I say my proudest accomplishment, of course, is as a mom, as a spouse, and as a daughter. And so in everything I do, I carry that in my mind and my heart. So down on the left in this picture, you'll see that I'm speaking to a group, and this is in my political organizing role, bringing people together in my home state of North Carolina to drive political change and society change. And we'll talk more about that. And in the middle, it's a group of amazing volunteers that I work with to do that. And then on the lower right is some work that I did with another group of amazing volunteers in my hometown to organize, as you can see from this, a room full of emergency relief supplies for Afghani refugees. This is when the United States was evacuating from Afghanistan not too long ago, a couple of years ago. And, you know, we organized thousands upon thousands of items for distribution, adding to millions of items for distribution across the state of North Carolina. So I care about not only my local community, but our global community. And lastly, by way of introduction, I will share with you that my family is multinational. My husband is originally from Iran. My daughters grew up being proud of their American culture and equally proud of their Persian heritage. And I think it's important as we look forward and build leadership in women and men that we remember that we are a global community. And I know you all believe that as well. So that's by way of introduction. So if we go to the next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of these items here because we're going to step through them one by one in the presentation. But this gives you a sense of the topics that we'll be talking about today. And I hope when we finish today that you're going to take away 3 things. One, it's super important for each of us as women, as leaders, to engage in our communities and to be politically active. And I'll talk about why as we go through. 2, being politically active is one step to building leadership. And I encourage each of you, as you're engaging in your schools, in your jobs, in your communities, to find ways to lead in your space, in your personal space. And then 3, I know many of you are teachers or are students. Schools are absolutely the place where positive impact to our societies begins. So we'll come back to this through the course of the presentation, but I hope those are 3 things that you'll take away today. So if we go to the next slide. So first, let's talk for a second about representation. And why is representation so important? And first off, ladies, women make up nearly half of the population around the world. Quite frankly, I was surprised that it's nearly half. I, for some reason, thought it was more than half. But as it turns out, in Nepal, it is more than half. And so it's about 52% of the population, according to the World Bank, is female. And so by definition, our representation as women is very important in society. Next slide. And so if we think about it, representation of diverse perspectives is important. And why is that? Well, because at the end of the day, political and educational decisions are made in the seats of power. They affect everyone's lives for the better or for the worse. And so making sure that women and men, of course, but women are represented in those positions of power makes sure that we have a well-rounded approach to addressing the problems of our society, and that we have women bring a comprehensive understanding of societal issues because we live them in many cases. We're the caregivers in many cases, not always, but in many cases. We are in the schools, we are, teaching. And so we have a sense of where the problems and opportunities to improve our society are. So that's one reason representation is important. But I'm going to share an expression on the next slide that, before we go to it, a leader that I'll introduce you to later in the presentation often says this saying, this expression. And she says it because she believes in representation. So let's go to the next slide. The saying goes, if you do not have a seat at the table in the positions of power, you will be on the menu. And we have seen this in societies across history, across the globe. And it's so important that people of not only different genders, but different races, different ethnicities, have a voice in the decision-making processes at every level of our government and political system. Next slide, please. So why should women lead? Well, it's because when we are leading, we start to challenge the stereotypes. We start to challenge the traditional gender norms that sometimes hold not just us, but it holds our men, our partners, it holds our society back. It's also important that it demonstrates that women are equally capable of serving in leadership positions. When you lead, you learn. When you learn, you lead better. And it's the same for women and men. So we need to have women in representation. And also it empowers and encourages women to break free from limitations that hold our society back. Next slide, please. So what happens when women lead? What actually happens? Well, when women participate in politics and in leadership in their schools in particular, in their jobs, it ends up creating policies that cater to not only the needs of women, but it caters to the needs of everyone. Because we know that women want our men and our boys to succeed as much as we want our girls to succeed. And so the policies that come out of that perspective will be well-rounded, will address the needs of our society. And it also, quite frankly, addresses gender-based violence, equal access to education, and workplace equity. If women are on an equitable earning scale, that helps all of our families. That helps all of society. Next slide, please. So I'll ask you to take a moment and think about women and men that you have admired in leadership, but particularly women. Think about someone that you've observed, and it could be at a national level or an international level, or it could be in your community or in your family. And I'll share a couple of mine with you. So the next slide, please. So this is a picture of Representative Valerie Foushee. She serves in the United States Congress. And I have come to know Representative Foushee over years of working here in North Carolina as a political volunteer. And I have great admiration for her. There's a story that I'll tell you that I didn't want to put on this slide because it's quite personal. And I'll come to that in a moment. But first, I'll share with you her background. So Representative Foushee in 2022 was elected to serve in our United States Congress. So she sits in the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and is now providing input on the political process and the political decisions in the United States of America. It's one of the highest places of power in our country. Prior to being elected to the U.S. House, Representative Foushee served in our state government, in the North Carolina Senate and the North Carolina House. So in North Carolina, just like we have in the United States government, we have a Senate and a House of Representatives. Well, our state also has a Senate and a House of Representatives. And so Congresswoman Foushee served in both of those bodies of our legislature. Prior to that, she served on our local government on something called the Orange County Board of Commissioners. A county in the US, you may know, is kind of like a province, a provincial area of government. And Representative Foushee served as the chair, the leader of that Board of County Commissioners. And that was after she served a number of years as a member of that Board of County Commissioners. But now let's go all the way back to her political beginning in Orange. Representative Foushee, who now sits in one of the highest decision-making bodies in our United States political system, began by serving on her local school board in my town of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And that was after she began volunteering at her son's school in the mornings for serving breakfast for the students in the morning. And she began because she wanted to make sure those children who did not have the money to buy their own breakfast would have a healthy breakfast at the school. So you can see that leadership comes in many forms, and leadership can be progressive over time and built over time. Now, the story that I did not put on this slide that is very personal is a story of why she is so motivated to serve. And Representative Foushee, when she was just a teenager of 11 or 12 years old, had a cousin, and her cousin lived in the same town. This was, I think, the son of her mother's brother, I believe. And they all went to the local university. And of course, as you can see, Representative Foushee is Black, she's African American. Together with their friends, her cousin went to the local university where they were having at the time a Black-white racial meet and greet gathering to try and break down the barriers in our community between the races. This is back in 1970, so over 50 years ago. And a white gang came to that gathering and stabbed her cousin outside of the dance. And that was one horrible, horrible issue that night. But the second horrible, horrible issue was that when the police came to attend to the scene, they did not arrest any of the white gang.
Wow.
And he bled out and passed away on the ground. Even though her cousin's friends told the police, we're gonna take him to the hospital now. We're gonna take him to the hospital now. And even though finally, when the police brought him to the hospital, the doctor said, if he could have gotten here 10 minutes earlier, I could have saved his life.
Wow.
This, as you can imagine, was deeply painful, not only to her, but her family and to everyone that knew what had happened. But this incident in 1970 in the United States of America did not get the attention. And the community wanted to forget it. And it did for a long time. But it was burning in Representative Foushee's mind and heart and soul that she was going to go and do things that would make a difference, not only for young boys like her cousin who was murdered, but for everyone in her community and our community. So I share that story, and I know each of us has personal challenges and personal motivations. Take that energy, if you have it, and channel it, because you can see where that anger, that passion, that need to do something to change for positivity can lead. It can lead to serving in one of the highest political decision-making bodies in the country. So we'll take a moment and move on to the next slide. So what happens when women hold leadership positions? Well, they become role models, right? We all have women and role models that we can think of who have inspired us to get to where we are right now. And of course, young girls are inspired when they see others before them who look like them, who represent their community, who have done things to overcome great adversity. It inspires them to dream big and to believe in their potential, to get to where they want to go in whatever field plays to their strength. I will tell you, before we move to the next slide, I come from a family, we didn't have much when I was growing up. My family lived in a very small home there were many of us. I had 3 brothers and sisters, so 4 children, my parents, and my grandmother, who we took care of in my home. We didn't have enough bedrooms for each of us. We had to share. And when my grandmother came back from a stroke, having a stroke in the hospital, she had to be on a bed in our living room at one point in time where my mother was taking care of her. So we didn't have a lot. But my mother always told me, study, do well, focus on going to where you want to go. Nothing can stop you. Nothing can stop you. So I'm going to talk about a personal inspiration that goes beyond me, but how inspiration can skip generations. So next slide, please. That's it. So,
Sorry.
that's okay. So the lady on the left is my mother. She was a nurse, as you can see. She was told by her school guidance counselor in high school when she asked about different things that she could do. And this is, of course, as you can see, this is probably late 1940s. We're talking about early 1950s, this picture. And she told them she wanted to be a doctor or a nurse. And they told her, no, that's too hard. You should go be a secretary. Now, secretaries is honorable work. You know, all work is honorable, I believe. However, that wasn't what my mother wanted to do. And she was being guided to do something else that was not within her capability. She wasn't allowing herself to become her fullest potential. She really wanted to be a doctor, but she decided that in the society she was in at that time, that she would be a nurse. And she did, as you can see. She studied, she went to nursing school for 3 years. She worked so hard, and she became a nurse. And when I was growing up, she used to say to me, why don't you become a doctor? She wouldn't say it that way. She would say, have you ever thought about being a doctor? And I told her that was not my passion. Yeah. I wanted to be an engineer. And I'm glad I did that, because I met that gentleman there in the picture to the right, who is my husband. However, later, that young lady in the picture next to my husband, who was my daughter, one of my daughters, she took that inspiration from seeing and hearing about her grandmother on the left. And she decided to be a doctor. And she went to medical school. And she's about to finish her residency. And so Alice on the left and Sarah on the right are an example of how inspiration, it's not just mother to daughter, it's mother to granddaughter, it's aunt to niece, it's community leader to volunteer, it's president to another level of government in the state government. Inspiration goes and spreads and becomes a way that the society grows. Next slide, please.
I got chills. That was so moving.
So, well, diverse leadership styles refers to the fact that at the end of the day, when you have people who have different backgrounds, come from different parts of the country, different genders, you end up bringing the best minds together on a problem. And that can lead to innovative solutions and a better approach to solving those problems. And of course, having different leadership styles involved can make sure that, especially with women, we can foster collaboration empathy, and strong communication. Next slide, please. So there's research, and this is one of the reasons when I was working in large companies, IBM and Cisco, we did lots of research to figure out how to increase the productivity and impact of our organizations. And the research told us that when you have groups that are diverse, you're going to get better decisions, because you're going to get people who can challenge a way of thinking that might not take you down a good path and end up coming out with a better overall result. And having women present in those leadership positions make sure that we get those better decisions through diversity. Next slide, please. So let's talk about women's issues, because at the end of the day, women's issues are society's issues. And if you don't have women in leadership, you're much less likely to be addressing some key issues in our society. And I'm going to talk about North Carolina for a second. In North Carolina, we have a legislative body, the state Senate and the state House. We call it the General Assembly, the two together. It's currently, and I'm going to talk a little politics, it's currently dominated by the Republican Party. I happen to represent the Democratic Party, which in the United States, I'm of the opinion of is a more progressive, more solution-oriented, more diverse, more representative mindset in our philosophy of governance. But we have two parties in the United States and in North Carolina that dominate our politics, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Now, the Republican Party also tends to be more male-dominated. This is a generality, so I'm always careful about making generalities. But certainly, if you look at the leadership of our legislature in North Carolina, in the majority Republican Party, it's overwhelmingly white male. And we have had a series of decisions that are undermining these three issues, and in particular, the first two issues of maternal health and of education. And I will just give a couple of examples to bolster that. In the United States, we have, you probably are familiar with the fact that for many, many years, we have had access to abortion and maternal health care has been enshrined in our legal system. Women had the right to make decisions about their own reproductive health for many, many years. It was called, based on a decision made in the United States Supreme Court called Roe v. Wade many years ago, about 50 years ago. However, recently there's been a massive movement of the Republican Party to attack those rights for women to determine their own reproductive health and to remove those rights. And in North Carolina, our legislature right now that is dominated on the majority, not by women, is making decisions that remove those rights. So I use that example to say women's representation is crucial to not only maintaining basic rights, but growing them where they are very limited. And then, of course, similarly, we are seeing an attack on public education right now in our state. So those are two specific examples of how representation has an impact. Next slide, please. So breaking the cycle of discrimination happens as women become more involved in politics and more involved in leadership. And this is done at every level over time. Breaking the cycle of discrimination doesn't happen with the blink of an eye. You probably all know through your own lived experience. I know when I was studying engineering in college, before I went to college, I was told in high school, I was one of the top 2 students in physics in my high school and in my class. And I went to my physics teacher and I told him, I want to study physics or engineering when I go to college. And do you have any advice? And he said, my best advice to you is to not study that and study teaching. And I said, well, teaching is a very honorable career and profession. I would love to be a teacher. And then I said, but why wouldn't I want to be an engineer also and perhaps teach engineering? And he didn't understand my motivation because he didn't have my experience as a woman. And so I said to him, Mr. Tufel, not only will I seek to teach as I go through my career, I will seek to become an engineer and teach that. So I think it's important that breaking that cycle of stereotypes happens with each of us where we are in that moment. And so you all can do the same in your space. And this paves the way for future generations, for us to see fewer barriers for ourselves, for all of you, for your children, for your grandchildren. Next slide. So last on the list of areas where there's an impact, and I imagine that in Kathmandu, in India, in Nepal in general, the effects of climate change are being felt in an outsized way to the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions that are being made around the world. I know the United States, China are major offenders in those emissions, and yet the impacts are being felt much more harshly in countries like yours. And that is why it is important that if we are going to sustain our planet, sustain our communities, and make sure that we have a future for those next generations, that we've got to be involved. We've got to be involved because women will fight not only for their own communities, but for the global community. And it's got to be women who are thinking about those next generations, who are pushing for the broader society to plan for those next generations. Women tend to prioritize community well-being. So next slide, please. Now, if we're seeking to make cultural and societal change, we have to recognize that that is done in increments and over time and by the efforts of each of us. But having women leaders in politics and education can accelerate that societal change toward women's rights. Next slide. So let's come back to what I hope you are going to take away today. I hope you will continue to, if you already are, engaging in and being politically active. And being politically active doesn't necessarily mean, running for president of your country, but it means getting involved in the decision-making bodies in your community. If it's a school board, if it's a community activist group, lead in your space. Take those opportunities because you learn and develop and grow and can then do other endeavors to build your leadership. And schools, as you saw in the examples that I talked about, with Representative Congresswoman Fushi, with everything that you are doing in each of your days, school is where the positive impact to society begins. So with that, I'll take a deep breath, pause, and see if you all have any questions or comments or thoughts. I'd love to hear them.
That was so inspiring, Marilyn. I've never heard that story from you before, and I was so moved. Any of those stories, like especially the story about Sarah, was very moving. I didn't know that your mom wanted to become a doctor and your daughter become a doctor because was inspired by your mom. So that was so beautiful.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. I know a lot of the girls here, especially Prakriti. I remember she participated in her college but Prakriti, do you want to explain when you participated? Actually, you know what? I'm going to stop the recording and then we can have a little discussion. All right. Okay, let me find it here.